Everyone, Michelle again, and welcome to another regular movie Thursday. The movie that I just got done watching with, as you can see by the title, is The Last of Mohicans, starring Daniel Day-Lewis. So this is going to be the 1992 version, and it was fairly decent for what it was. A nice score. Nice characters, a nice build up to a good climax, and overall a very raw account of the French and Indian War, which took place before the American Revolution. If you read a little bit upon history, and basically the French and Indian War was the French against the English. And Daniel Day-Lewis's character, who is Hawkeye, and his adopted family basically get involved in this sort of conflict, and that plays a lot into the plot. And he comes across these three other characters. One is by the name of, I want to say, Major Duncan Hayward. And the two daughters of the, I want to say he's like the colonel of the, of, I guess what it could be considered part of the English side. And what ends up happening is that when these two come in contact, they sort of end up going on this sort of adventure as they go from one spot to the next, and you'll see how as it is laid out. It's pretty much sort of an adventure story, and not so much more of a war story. The war just happens to be going on, and it happens to conflict with a lot of the things that end up happening, and how they come into contact in the beginning is through a battle that goes on, and I think they do try to give you a sense of who these characters are. They do try to sort of lay out what they sort of represent and what they offer towards the table. I thought Daniel Day-Lewis's character, Hawkeye, was good. I thought his adopted family did a decent job but they weren't really given many lines so much. It was more focused on Daniel Day-Lewis's character and one of the other girl characters whose name is Cora Monroe, and she's played by, I think it's Madeline Stowe. And they sort of have this like little love thing going on, but it's not really the major plot point in the entire thing. And not really a major theme as to what the story is focusing on. It's more focusing on how, on the sort of dying Native American culture, and how, they're kind of pinned against each other, because there's some Indian tribes that are for the British. They want the British to win. And then there's some other Indian tribes who go with the French and want the French to win. And it does talk about this a little bit, and the main villain of this particular piece, named Magoo, I want to say, Magoo, played by Wes Schutte, is still given actually a little bit of depth for what they do and what they say, and how he portrays the character. But basically, he's trying to make sure that the British lose, and he wants sort of a revenge and some form of redemption, and you will see that. If you pay attention, you'll figure out what that is, and it'll all play out into this whole big plot. And when they end up, finally, the main characters, as we could say, all the main good guys meet up with each other, there's some form of conflict that arises throughout the piece, and you'll see that as they go from one place to the next. The two Monroe sisters, they're intended to go to meet up with their father, but then that ends up, once they get there, there's some misinterpretation, and there's also some different ways of how people think of what they should do because the British are losing where the father is located, which is at a Fort McHenry, and that causes a lot of controversy and adds a little bit more to the plot. For what it is, I think it's worth maybe just putting it on for a watch for once. I think, although they don't maybe go into sort of the, maybe I guess, tragedy of the dying in Native American culture, but they go into sort of, how that kind of is being brought about by these divisions. And you'll kind of see how Magoo's character sort of embodies that, because he uses his anger as a form of revenge, and that ends up like destroying a lot of things instead of making things better. So you'll see how that sort of philosophy plays out, and for what it is, it's fairly decent, and you kind of are wondering who's going to survive, who's going to die. It's that kind of thrill that you get from watching it for the first time. And since I kind of already know what happens, and since I've seen this movie before, I was still sort of a little bit on the edge of my seat, but then still knowing who's going to live and who's going to die kind of took the fun, I guess, out of it. So I would just recommend that you watch it maybe once, and then you'll get the sense of it, unless you completely forget, like, years later what it was even about. And you can watch it again. If you can get that same kind of thrill. It's a sort of adventure type conflict-driven movie. It has a little love thing on the side of it, and that may be a little bit too sappy for people, but I don't think it was in it for that long. And they just kind of hug, and there's like one kiss scene, and that's pretty much it. I mean, they don't really make that like the main focus. I think what they wanted to do was just give Daniel Day-Lewis and then one of the other girls a little bit just more development, and thought they could do that by adding a romance in it. It doesn't really affect me much. Like, I'm not that invested. I'm actually more invested in the Alice girl, who's the other sister, even though she's rarely in it. She's barely in this movie. There's one scene where at the very end, and you'll see where it's very powerful and resonative, and I didn't even know, why she does what she does in the end. I've never understood really why, but I found that more interesting, and wanted to a little bit know more about her, I think, than really any of the other characters. Even though Daniel Day-Lewis does a good job. I mean, as it's sort of, I think, his kind of starting point. I guess you could say, because he looks really young in this one. And it's hard to believe that it's literally 30, or no. Well, yeah, it's literally 20 years old. And, why did I say 30? Oh, getting my numbers mixed up. But from what I'm saying here is basically, I think it's worth one watch. It's worth one sit through to get through it, and to kind of get yourself into the whole history. The whole environment that they set up is really cool, I think, with like a lot of the fighting is like really, comes out with trees. It's all like Surprise-esque type violence. It's not like a war movie where you see two sides going against each other. It's very like within nature, and I thought that was interesting, and I thought it was resignative sort of the history a little bit, and I think it was trying to be a little bit more philosophical to a certain extent instead of really character based. So don't think you're going to get really any memorable characters here. You're probably not. But you're probably going to get a decent story with a lot of points that go from here to there to here to there. And then it's all leading up to this one big climax. And and I thought it was interesting how they developed some characters, like with Magoo, and then with who's the villain, and then with some of the good guys. However, you could debate on whether he's a good guy, but the major that I mentioned, Major Duncan Hayward, his character is kind of you kind of don't understand. I didn't understand like why he lied at one point, and you'll if you pay attention, you'll understand what I mean. But I think he wasn't really meant to be like one of the more likable ones, and you'll kind of see what I mean as this kind of piece goes through, and how he's maybe a little bit, a little bit too forceful on Cora, and you'll kind of see that play out. But in the end, it's all leading from, they go from one point of the fort, and then they leave the fort, and then they go to here and then to there because something else happens, and and I don't want to reveal all this stuff to you because I'd rather have you watch it and you decide. But this is basically what I'm giving you as a summary as to what this movie has in store. Now, the director of this particular one is Michael Mann, I believe, and he directed, I believe it was Heat, Public Enemies, and Miami Vice. So, as from what I can tell, those movies were, I guess, decent. I mean, again, not the best, but they still have, I think, something to offer. It may not be the, top notch. It's not like where I was reviewing, like, Robert Zemeckis movies where they're considered, like, on top of their class or as really, really amazing movies. But these ones in particular, I think people sort of maybe remember a little bit. But for me, I think out of all the movies that I've listed that he's done, I think probably this one is the better one. And I think the score is really cool. Whenever it starts playing, you get like this real like kind of, I don't know, intensity, and you feel like you're there. You feel like you're roaming around with these Native American people, and it's really interesting, and it has some of like Native traditions from a long time back. You will notice that people, and I think what's interesting actually about this movie a lot is like just the violent parts of it, because it's so different from a lot of other movies. The Native American tradition way back then was if you killed your enemy, you would scalp their head. And you'll see a lot of scalping in this movie. There's a lot of scalping in this movie. There's a lot of things that pop, like because they come out of the trees, like literally. The Native Americans just come out of the trees and then start attacking people. So it's very a surprise-esque type violence. It's not like systematic or any of that in any of that sense. It's very randomized, and a lot of it's done with there is guns, but most of the intense stuff is done with like clubs and things like that, things that Native Americans had during that time. And I think it was interesting to see the characters kind of fight that way. For what it is a decent decent film, I believe. It's worth, I think, just sitting through it once. Will I probably see this movie again? Maybe, maybe not. It's kind of like I was okay with it. I don't think it's the best movie. I mean, I don't think it's really underrated for what I can say from watching it. But I think at the same time, it still has its good stuff in it. It just kind of depends on what kind of a moviegoer you are. If you like really, really in-depth, complex characters, you're probably not going to get it here. But if you don't mind them showing you sort of a history that a lot of people don't really talk about, because not a lot of movies don't really address the French and Indian War. They always, if anything, or even the Revolutionary War, it seems like that period we just kind of, movie directors just kind of just leave to the side and don't really talk about those kinds of things. If anything, they just maybe address it in like a mini-series. For example, John Adams, which was a recent mini-series, came out a few years back, and it talks about the revolutionary times, but I haven't really seen any other movies that have been about the French and Indian War. Not at all. So I think Hollywood should really just take a hint and try to maybe do this, because I think they could do this, and they could probably even do it better. This movie is actually based upon a book, but the book, I believe, is really different and focuses more on different things than the movie does. The book focuses, I think, a lot on, from what I can remember, because I did read the book, focused more on like racism and things like that, of that nature, and it didn't really focus on romance or any of that stuff. So, and a lot of the things that happen are different. So I think I think I liked the movie better just because it just tightens everything. And then with the book, it just seems to drag on. And then you kind of go, okay, we get the point. We get the point. We get the point. So I think it's, in the book is just a little bit more tedious. And doesn't really leave you with intensity. But I think the movie does. But by a lot of like the visual stuff, and also by how the characters take in what's happening, what's going on. But for what it is, it's a decent film. I think it's worth mentioning, worth looking at if anyone's interested. Really liked the score. Daniel Day-Lewis was a lot of fun. And yeah, I think people can get some value out of it, but I don't think it's going to leave like a really big, deep, lasting impact on people. But I think it's just interesting because no films have really talked about this. So I think it's nice to see that piece of history being sort of represented somehow. But I think that's really all I can say about this film. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And I will see you all tomorrow while I'll be talking about Pinocchio. And another thing to mention about that segment that always happens on Fridays is that I'm going to do it in order. So the first Disney movie that came out was Snow White. So that's why I did Snow White first. And then I'll just go from there in order. And the next movie that they made was Pinocchio. So I'm going to talk about Pinocchio tomorrow. And we'll see how that goes, because, oh boy, I think there's going to be a lot of things to hammer down with that one. But until then, hope everybody has a wonderful week, and hopefully I will see you all tomorrow.